It's time to check in on all things Tesla, as it is still the third best performing in the S&P 500 at least year to date, with a rally up around 110%. And I spoke too soon saying shares were lower because now we're slightly higher on the session, but breaking that 13-day winning streak. So here to tell us more now on some of the recent price activity and this really optimistic note we got out of Wedbush's Dan Ives, Ben Lichtenstein here to tell us more. Ben, walk us through this, because I saw Dan Ives calling this an AWS moment for Tesla.
Yeah, big time. I kind of hear that in my own mind in like a Dick Vitale voice almost. Dan Ives rooting this one on. But let's get into what's playing out here in terms of how this is an interesting stock, not only from the fundamental, but also from the technical perspective. We can get into that in a few minutes. A couple analyst notes, as you mentioned, on Tesla making headlines today. We did hear from, RBC Capital raising the firm's price target on Tesla to 305 from 212, keeping an outperform rating on shares of TSLA. RBC is actually modeling the company's autonomous driving, as a separate business. They see the leading full driving software offsetting some of the margin dilution we've seen from lower price models, and they say it's positioned well as they transition into a software business. Now, we also heard about how, robo-taxis, autonomous vehicles are, we know they're going to potentially transform society, right? They're going to change things quite a bit, our lifestyles, save hours, trillions, millions of hours across the world here in terms of some of these driving these autonomous vehicles. But RBC talking about how conservatively they think that Tesla's positioned well as far as that penetration as this becomes more and more predominant. They see, they're estimating 25% in terms of penetration in the U.S. Now, Wedbush analyst, you mentioned Dan Ives, he sees Tesla on track to hit its 1.8 million unit delivery expectation for the year. And he says that they're going to be able to do it with margins expecting to trough initially in the next 1 to 2 quarters and then ramp back up into fiscal 2024. But he also believes China demand this quarter is basically progressing very strong and with a steady, the last few weeks of June, he thinks that should translate into record China quarter for the second quarter. Now, battery production out of Nevada remains very strategically advantaged for Tesla, and the move to that 4680 battery cell production is going to be another, as he liked it. And this is where, or as he called it, I should say, this is where I heard that Dick Vitale voice. He always says a checkmate win, right? And so production, the launch of this new Cybertruck he sees later this year, that's also going to add to the growth story. And another few models on deck, a sub $30,000 vehicle. The firm has an outperform rating on shares with a price target of 300, Jenny. Basically $45 to the upside here. The stock's trading around 250 right now, up around 0.25% on the day.
Yeah, and Ben, I like that he actually called that $1.8 million delivery or vehicle target a bogey for Tesla shares. I was liking this note as well, but walk us through now the technical levels, because I saw actually RSI went over 88. That's its highest level in nearly 2 years, which could then signal the fact Tesla shares are the most overbought they've been in nearly 2 years.
Yeah, I mean, they've been a little bit overdone, that's for sure. But in a trend environment to the upside, it's tough to fade that. And, Tesla has been in a trend to the upside. One characteristic of a stock that's trending higher is it spends limited time retracing the move up. Pullback short-lived as a drop in price is met with new longs coming in, shorts covering. Hence the saying, the trend is your friend, right? Because the market spends very little time against you if you're positioned properly in the direction of it. And it looks like that's what's happening and what we're seeing in terms of Tesla. Let's begin with this 5-minute chart for a look at how the move lower this week. Everybody's talking about $20, right, from 264 to 246, but it's still yet to trade below the lows from earlier in the week. $20 off the high seems like a big deal, but it's important to put that into perspective. And when we do, you can see the second characteristic of, let's move this way actually. You can see the second characteristic of a trend environment to the upside, and that's migration of value. Here I've got some of those areas mapped out. That run up that we've seen, we're basically going back to the lows that was around 160 in the beginning of May, and over a short period of time, you can see how we've added on basically $100 to the upside. I also just want to point out, as we take another step, you can see, look at this, reversing the trend after a brittle triple top. We saw that huge move lower down to 100. The beginning of the year has basically been a trend reversal, and that came into play big time through 221 as we took out that key area that we formed throughout October, November of last year. So this one's off to the races here, Jenny, reversing a trend on the longer term, and still a very well-defined trend, as you can see, again, getting back to that hourly chart on the more intermediate.
Yeah, and it's just sort of ridiculous to see that move that we've seen, just a 30% gain even month to date now in Tesla shares, just continuing to rip higher. But we will leave it there. Appreciate all of the insight, Ben Lichtenstein, the host of Futures.